Hello, and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guildhouse. This is a weekly podcast in which I, your host, Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the tabletop, RPG, and surrounding space. And this week, I feel like, again, it's one of the cases where I feel like my guest doesn't need any introduction. But no, I'm joined by Teos Abadia. Hello, how are we doing?
Hey Matthew, thanks for having me on the Guildhouse. This is awesome. I appreciate it. I'm doing
No,
really well.
it's the feeling is oh so mutual. It's honestly like this is a highlight of mine.
Well,
So
same. And you've had some guests on this show that are just amazing. I think one of the most recent ones that I've worked with is Kat Kruger. She's incredible. And
that was like honestly a highlight of mine because I was giggling from kind of start to finish. But you know what? I guess again, for whatever reason, if the people listening perhaps haven't heard, some of the stuff you do, or under I guess the Alpha Shroom handle,
yeah.
what sort of things have you been making?
Sure. A lot of things. So I've worked on organized play for many years, which is how I got my start. So there are a number of big event things like the Confrontation at Candlekeep adventure that ran at Gen Con and PAX. I worked on the Dracolich adventure with Mike Shea and Scott Fitzgerald Gray that was just super fun. Vault of the Dracolich, that ran in stores. So that's kind of how I sort of build things up. And then I've released things on the DMsGuild. I worked on the Acquisitions Incorporated book, which is an official book that's a Wizards of the Coast book written in collaboration with Penny Arcade. I've worked on the Dwarven Forge adventures that you can get free off of their website. They're a terrain company. And then recently on the Hero Quest board game, which I have behind one, that's over there.
Yeah, I was going to say, you kind of like, again, with all the dragons, you've kind of got like the perfect kind of setup to kind of just, this little thing.
Thanks. It's one of the nice things about working on this for pay as an organization is that you can actually have things in your office that are toys, which normally you can't do if you're in your office for work. So, but yeah, the HeroQuest board game, that was my first real board game work. The Kingdoms and Warfare adventure that appears in that book for MCDM.
Yeah.
And then currently I'm working on something I can't talk about, which is pretty coal.
Nice.
And I'm working on an adventure that my son and I wrote, just getting the layout done so we can launch that on a Kickstarter. So that'll be fun.
Wow. Again, yeah, I almost feel like I have to apologize for the amount of stuff that you had out to because, but if I remember this correctly, because with all the kind of Adventure League stuff that you kind of started off with, that did predate the Dungeon Masters Guild.
Yes, it did. In fact, I was one of those designers that when the guild first launched, they were like, hey, we're going to put your adventure up and you'll get more money than what you already got paid to do. And it was like, well, thank you. That's really nice of you. And so we got, the $500. This is now public information, but the $500 that they'd given us beforehand to write the adventure. And then we got our guild earnings for the season 1 and 2 adventures. And so that was like great, double payment, which is extremely appreciated. Very nice of Wizards to do.
Yeah, no, and then I guess as they say, the rest is kind of history. But then I guess kind of we'll work like chronologically. So with kind of how it was like back with kind of starting with Adventure League, I guess was it like what kind of got you to sit down and kind of write your first adventure?
Yeah, well, it was in fact organized play. So I was playing back even before Adventurers League existed in 3rd edition in what was called Living Greyhawk, which was sort of maybe the second large program that came through D&D's history as a true organized program. There was Living City before that, and then before that was just sort of the RPGA network. So when Living Greyhawk started, I jumped in fairly early on, and I was just amazed at how good it was. Like just such a fun experience. And it was all driven by these volunteers that were writing just incredible content and working together and collaborating. And, after I got a little comfort, I said, how can I help?
Yeah.
And that's really how it started, was just volunteering, right? No pay, just the joy of it. But what would happen is these folks had written so many adventures that when you turned something in, they'd say, I had to change this. Here's why. Mm-hmm. So it was a very good learning experience, and that's really kind of what got my start. And so I wrote for some things for 3rd edition. I wrote some things for 4th edition organized play. And then D&D Next actually got a lot of work when 5th edition was being play tested. I got a lot of sort of prominent big work that I was very fortunate to land with some other really good co-writers. And then I wrote a couple of Adventures League adventures as well as the seasons got underway.
Yeah.
And I just love it. I love the idea that players, first of all, it's like, when you create, it's really nice if people see your things.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you write a lot and work really hard and not that many people see it. And organized play is one of those things where you're kind of guaranteed that a lot of people will go through it.
Yeah.
And you can go to like a convention and, you can see people running your adventure, and you can even sit at the table or listen from afar and see how it plays, table after table after table, hundreds of people. And you get that sense of like, okay, here's what worked, here's what didn't. So it's just a fantastic way to learn.
Yeah, and I guess so. Again, this is a kind of question that I always kind of love, particularly when it comes to like the Adventure League side of things, because it is kind of writing adventures kind of to a template or to kind of like a format. I'm just curious about like how you kind of like, again, well, I guess especially seeing the template change over the seasons and particularly the additions of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm known for not being not lacking opinions, let's say.
Yeah.
And the template, that format has changed drastically over the years. I like to say the only thing that's constant in organized play is change. So if you don't like it, just wait. It's going to change. And there have been some years for Adventures League where I thought the format hurt the writer and hurt the dungeon master, right? Like it took away rather than improving or being neutral, and was hard to write. I did not write during those years, and I still think there are some formats in there, some aspects of the format, for at least like what I saw in the last season, that are a little difficult. That they force the writing of something, they force a heading or force a section the adventure doesn't need, the DM doesn't necessarily want to see, but it must be there because that's the rule.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting, and I'm always kind of like fascinated about the kind of the adventures I've kind of designed into, because again, I think when I kind of started off, I kind of worked with the kind of the CCC program, and kind of working with that kind of format was always kind of again, it was a really interesting kind of, I guess, design exercise. But then it's hard now when I kind of go away and then again I just write my own adventures for the sake of it, where again I'm a little bit more frivolous with my vocabulary, or I'm just like, I could put anything, there's no restrictions. Whereas maybe sometimes it's just like, sometimes it's nice to kind of have that kind of like skeleton to kind of work to. I guess kind of, oh sorry, no, go ahead.
I'll add that something that was a real learning for me. So there's writing on your own, which is literally fill the pages however you want, and then there's work with something like the Adventures League, a program like that, where you must kind of fulfill various directives of what they want for the story, the structure they want. And then when you write for an actual publication, the one that's really planned out, then it's extremely restrictive in that if you think of a monster, right? Like a monster in a D&D book really needs to take up sort of a column on half the page.
Yeah.
Or a half a page or a quarter of a page, or so, but it must be these sort of confined variables. You can't just add whatever words you want. And the same is true of your text. Like the introduction can't be 6 pages, and it can't just end whenever. It has to really end at the bottom of the page, given the art and all of that. And so when people give you a word count, they will, the project manager or director will give you a word count that you must hit, because that art is configured into that, right? And if you go over or under, it really messes up that. And that was a whole another experience when I realized the extent to which my words had to fit that template. No matter what your creative juices might be telling you, this should be shorter. I'd like this chapter of the adventure to be shorter and that one to be longer. Sorry, they are all the same size, and you must make that work. Right?
I think, though, again, it's always interesting because it forces you to kind of distill down certain elements to be like, okay, what is the focus? Like, okay, I have these really cool, I don't know, potential goblin. It's always goblins for me. I have 2 potential kind of goblin encounters, maybe one involving a cannon of some kind. Which one do I kind of like prioritize with the word count? And then you can kind of say, okay, well, with the words I would have used on this, I don't know, goblin trebuchet.
Love it.
Yeah, there you go. It's got to be some sort of goblin propellant. You can kind of hone that kind of I guess that whole kind of experience to be the best it can be.
Totally.
But I feel like you've set me up nicely for a segue to kind of talk about what it is like writing for kind of like hardcover
Yeah.
And particularly with the kind of again your alluring backdrop of the Acquisitions Incorporated. My first question actually is less about like writing for hardcover itself, but it's more about like writing in a comedic style. Because I like to consider myself something of a comedic individual, whether whether successful or not. And that definitely comes through in kind of my writing and aspects. But I feel like it's I don't know, it's different to kind of maintain not only comedy, but again, Acquisitions incorporate its own unique branch of kind of comedy.
Well, there's two aspects to it, and my friend Sean Merwin kind of said this in a way that caused it to crystallize in my brain. And he was a co-writer on the Acquisitions Incorporated book. You want comedy. Comedy in D&D isn't just comedy. It's a kind of comedy in that the table already has comedy. So what you want to do is deliver the setup so they can do the punchline. You also want reading it to be funny, so that you want to have fun with it and you're in the right mindset for it. And in this case, it was specific type of comedy, which is that Acquisitions Incorporated flavor of comedy that has a little bit of darkness to it. It's satirical because it's based on the workplace, right? And the idea of corporations. And if you know anything about the Penny Arcade guys, they hate that kind of thing in real life. So it's deliberately dark and twisted so that you can make fun of it and play off of it in a sort of fun, in a deliberate satirical kind of way, right?
Yeah.
So when we were writing, we were always trying to channel that kind of humor and create that kind of an experience. And I think it's a thing you have to do, like anything else, through practice, where you're writing these words so that they will make you kind of chuckle as you're reading them.
Yeah.
So that it's entertaining. And if you read, like Sean wrote the pieces that are all about, like, if you play a barbarian, here's how you could make your barbarian work in the Acquisitions Incorporated world. And it's just hilarious, right? Yeah. And then the Penny Arcade team added these tables that you see throughout those sections that have all these really neat ideas on how you can do things. And that adds to the comedy to a whole nother level, right? Where they just literally had everybody at the Penny Arcade office contribute these things.
Yeah.
And it's great because it's a lot of different minds with a lot of different comedic styles. And then you get to the adventure, which is showing you how to. And again, that is really about the setup, right? The idea that the situation will be funny. So for example, we have a tavern where you must figure out how to get to the enemy. The enemy is said to operate out of this tavern. So it's sort of a spy scenario, which normally is a very, dark noir kind of serious thing. But the NPCs here are quite comedic, and there are some silly situations. Like there's a pirate who's set up for you to take advantage of them, in that they've got a hand that's weirdly sort of rotting away. And the other clue you get leads you to this person who has decided to start a business. This is the former informant. And the business they've started is one where you take peg legs and hooks, but they go on the opposite limb than intended. So the hook goes on the foot and the peg goes on the hand. And they're super convinced that this is the way to do it, right?
Yeah.
So what it can be is, where literally characters decide not to save that NPC's hand and instead be business for this shop that does the peg hook switch.
Yeah, the swapperoo. But yeah, no, it's kind of, so I guess it's kind of the fact is like there's so many situations where you can kind of bring the party in, and again, it's always, it varies party to party, but there's probably going to be like, I don't know, like the straight man of the party who is going to be like, this is very irresponsible, and that in itself kind of brings its own kind of like comedic flair. There's there's kind of multiple layers to it that essentially you kind of, it's like a sandbox of comedy where everything is kind of set up to kind of fall in its right way.
And that's the idea. Like we have a mind flare show off, like standoff with the villain, and it's mind flare, but his tentacles are twined into a mustachio. Right. And so it's still mind flare. This is still dangerous. It's still serious in terms of mechanics and everything, but it's just that element that gives you some possibilities, and he carries a business card, right? And just things like
I mean,
that.
yeah, you're gonna kind of have to.
Yeah, it injects that element.
But what I really kind of like about what you said kind of earlier is that when it comes to the actual kind of writing, it's almost as if you're kind of writing through like I guess like a persona in your own kind of way, because it's not, again, well, you never want, again, D&D writing to be kind of like dry and academic in any sort of sense, but it's kind of that idea of like it's almost the other end of the spectrum, where it's just like within this context you're kind of free to kind of write whatever you want. They're kind of like quips like built in with the text.
Yeah. Well, I try to always be very aware of the audience and the voice, and if I'm representing a brand, then what the brand is and what its voice is, right? So MCDM is a good example, which was a project that I was working on last year. Matt Colville has a voice. If you watch his YouTube channel for just a few minutes, you quickly see, oh, this is it's not just a run-of-the-mill person. He has a style, he has an approach to things, and if you watch him run a game, that carries through. But he has a voice and a way of tackling subjects. And so I actually listened to a lot of his videos, including ones I'd already listened to before, just to have the way he thinks in my mind. So when I wrote the adventure, because it was an adventure he had outlined, and I think in my thought was, Matt's probably a person who's pretty particular about what he wants, because he has a real clear vision about the game, about the world, about his company. So I wanted to be inside that voice, and think about how he would write this, how would he have fleshed out this outline. And I did my own things, but I wanted to speak to that. And he actually said that he appreciated sort of how I'd brought my own elements to it, right? So it wasn't too much. In fact, there was an edit where I took out some of his voice, because I realized after I'd stepped away from it a bit, I said, okay, maybe I went a little too far in being kind of casual and friendly. He wouldn't have actually gone quite that far. I need to, tone it down a bit. So there's just traces of it, but not, because I think he's such a great persona that you want, I think, for me buying the product, I want it to be a little like Matt, right? And if you read his first book, like there's clearly such a strong voice to it that I thought that was good.
I think it is funny, because it almost sounds like you're almost rehearsing for like a method acting role. But then I guess
I do not have an acting background. I don't know what you mean.
I'm not either. So I'm just kind of making.
Yeah.
I just assume that's what. But I guess would you say it's like, so if entering a project, there's a kind of very kind of distinct voice you kind of want to go in. Is that kind of like your advice then? Is just kind of absorb yourself in, the kind of style of voice as much as possible?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, I think that when you're freelancing and you're not doing it for yourself, one thing I like to do is I like to do a couple things in terms of my process. One is to start on paper, or very early, just work on paper with ideas. And I have no idea if this is science, but it feels to me like it's more creative that way. I also have horrible handwriting, so I know that it can't live in this format. It must become something else. So it's like the loosest of loose draft outline things that, because all these ideas are scrawled and whatever, I will have to interpret them. I can't just take them the way they are, right?
Yeah.
So then when I actually get to a digital document, it must already transformed from its initial state, and by necessity, if I'm going to have to figure out the chicken scratch that I produced and what it actually means. So that's one thing I do. But even at the very, very first thing is, I need to know, what did my client, what did the person who employed me, the entity that employed me, what did they direct me to do, and beyond that, what are my goals based on what I think they want, right? And so my first top thing in whatever document I'm going to work into are my goals. And so for MCDM, I might say, okay, this adventure is the adventure that teaches a DM how to use the warfare rules.
Yeah,
it must facilitate that top level goal, right? And another one was, I think it needs to be in the MCDM voice, because I think it's such a strong brand and presence. People want that. So nothing that the client asked me to do, but that I'm thinking, yeah, this is a top goal, right? And other goals. There can be personal things like, I want this company to hire me again. Right? But just things that will guide you, so that when you're working through this project, you're not going to forget those things somehow. Right? And maybe it's an improvement thing. Like maybe last time, your monsters were too wordy. So I want to write really tight monsters, right? Or I want the magic items to really spark creativity. it can be whatever, but those top level goals then help you just keep, every time you open up that document, you start and look at that first and go, yep, okay, let's go.
Yeah. No, interesting. Yeah, I must admit, again, I do love hearing about others kind of designers kind of like process, because I think it's I can see kind of like similarities between like your process and mine, but it's just like it's in their own kind of like, again, so where you have the kind of like in your own words the chicken scratch
Yeah.
across code log page is like I just have lists on lists. I have like kind of like the list with like core idea, and then that kind of breaks down into like, you know, subheadings of like, okay, this is kind of maybe the area to kind of go, and then everything has its skeleton that bit by bit gets, you know, the flesh on the bones. But yeah, I think like I don't, yeah, I no, yeah, it's I guess quite fascinating to kind of hear about that kind of constant and kind of I guess like awareness to be like, okay, well this is kind of what we kind of want out of it, and kind of have that kind of in the like, well, forefront to begin with, and then kind of in the background of your mind, but it never kind of leaves you. Interesting.
And because there are projects where, like, especially on my own projects or on organized play projects, I remember adventures that I would play or content that I would see, but especially adventures where it was basically something new, something I hadn't ever dealt with before. And that was really kind of fascinating to me and educational to me as a DM when I had to run those for various tables, say in organized play, and I'm running a table after table. And like the first time you run a mystery, for example, right? That's a memorable thing for you as a DM. And then the next time is memorable as well, because it's probably written a little differently. And so it builds your toolkit and it expands your mind as to what's possible. And when you read someone's design and it's good design and it's different design, it sort of like necessarily adds to your toolkit, right? Yeah. So sometimes when I'm writing, and especially for organized play, I want that. I'm like, I'm going to do something that's different, you know, a different type of situation, which will be cool for the player because it's a different experience, but it's hopefully cool for the DM because it's like now their toolkit expanded as to how to run this kind of thing, or and if they're a designer, how to write it, right?
I think it is kind of like what's kind of amazing about how flexible, like, again, we're just like writing in general, is the fact that there are so many almost like design voids of areas that just haven't been explored, or like, you know, mechanics, situations, all that you can kind of play around with. So then I'm kind of curious then if your process kind of begins with almost like identifying like this is okay, like let's say I want to do a murder mystery, or, you know, I want to do like I don't know, I'm curious about like what are like some of the two-part question, you know. I have so many questions. I guess one would be like, okay, well, what are some of the kind of like in your past adventures, I guess, subjects that you've kind of wanted to tackle?
Yeah.
And then I guess like following up is like kind of like, where did these ideas come from? Like,
yeah. So a lot of it comes from inspiration, right? And one of the things I say to creators is play a ton. Yeah. And you can see this, creators of all stripes, of all levels, some of the best out there will sometimes admit on places like Twitter, man, I'm not playing a lot. And that's a problem, because you need to have that input. And when you see different players and you see your stuff get played, that's really necessary feedback. But also because you're encountering, if you're running other people's things, you're encountering this design, and the more varied, the better. So different systems, different approaches, right? They all teach you very different lessons. So some of the ones that I've had is like Will Doyle wrote, who, you know, worked most recently on Wild Beyond the Witchlight with his wife, Stacey Allan. Will wrote an adventure long ago called Tears of a Crocodile Tears of a Crocodile God. Yeah. And it's really great for a number of reasons, but one of it is that it has moving pieces. There are these NPCs that are sacrifices, and they have a trail they follow, and they move across the map based on certain things. And I just thought that was so fascinating. And so I wrote an adventure, The Howling Void, for organized play, where I said, okay, the villains are going to, and the idea was chaos. It's an air orb, right? An air elemental node that's going to explode. Yeah. So I just thought that's as chaotic gets. Let's, outside of being in limbo, so let's embrace that chaos and have it be a little weird. So the node is sort of these rooms that are swirling around. So they're moving. And the foes are moving, and there's a table of where things go. So you may go to a place, and you may get there right after a bad guy was there, or during or before. And that impacts things a bit. And then the challenge was, how do I make this not super confusing for the DM, right? I need charts. I need very clear rules. It can't be wild. The chaos has to be something you feel, not something that happens when you're running.
Yeah.
And
I
murder
think that
mysteries.
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was literally just going to say that is always like an interesting contrast and challenge. Is that kind of almost like translation of like the idea to like it makes sense in my head. Like I have the timeline of the 7 different NPCs when they move and where. But how do I make it sure that everyone universally knows? Yes, it's 3:00. Someone should be having their dinner right now.
Yeah, and I like we can see that in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, where Will Doyle and Stacey Allan put in these timetables for every major NPC. The big bads, they have here's what their day looks like, and that's really helpful, right? Because now well, they should be one of these 3 places, and here's what they're doing, and I know that, but they're not static, right? But it's not insane how they move, and that's helpful.
I think again because it kind of it leads into the kind of like I guess the type of adventures that follow these kind of structures. They always feel more dynamic, and again they kind of have the kind of domino effect of like 300 people could like play the adventure and all kind of have their own kind of unique experience coming out of it. Which again I think is it's always like I guess. I was about to say 50-50, but it's probably more than that. Is because you want everyone kind of coming out like it. On one side, it is nice to like know there is a very concise adventure that everyone has the same experience, ideally a good time. But then on the other end of the spectrum, like I don't think anyone's had the same experience twice with this adventure. I don't know what that means. it's just how it goes.
Right. Well, and that can be a feature, right? That's okay, right? And so the question I always ask myself at the end of a project is sort of, did that end up being a feature, or is that a thing that I wish I'd done differently, right? So sometimes I have a monster that I really loved the monster, but it had too many things it could do, and it got in the way. So I should have changed that, right? Like I should. My next one should be more efficient. It's fine, and I'm very forgiving of my failings. I'm like, whatever I messed up, that's cool.
Yeah.
On we go. I don't care. Next game, right? And so, sometimes I learn, or I'll get a note from a developer or editor that says, we cut a power from that monster because it just had too much going on, and I'll realize, that was my favorite power the monster had.
Yeah.
And the lesson is, write leaner monsters and then stuff won't get cut. So next time I'm going to do that.
I think it is kind of like almost like without fail that every time I'm working with an editor, I come away with, again, if it's not writing advice or like design advice, it's always, there's at least one core lesson that I can kind of take away with me and stuff like that and kind of pass on to the next. And yes, it's kind of exciting. It's I don't know. It's nice when people engage with your things on some level, whether it is like an editing front or if it is kind of like on a playtesting end.
Yeah, I love that.
But then I guess I kind of wanted to kind of my follow-up question then is so when it comes to not necessarily commissioned work, things like the upcoming Kickstarter with your son.
Yeah.
Are some of those ideas are they essentially just coming up from those sources of inspiration as well, or is there kind of like a more I guess free-form process of like idea generation?
Yeah, so sometimes I'm really like, there's a thing I want to try, right? There's a thing I want to do. What if you switched bodies? What if the villain's your friend, right? Those kinds of, sometimes you have an itch you want to scratch and there's just a thing and this is the right place to do it, and so that I do that. But like in this adventure, which is called the Clockwork Tower, my son and I would be sort of on hikes initially, and we'd talk about the concept to just loosely think about what's going on. And a lot of this started as a project to sort of teach him writing and writing approaches, outlining and things like that. So we would just wildly think about all kinds of permutations and then, what's sort of sticking, with the knowledge that, an adventure should sort of have but so many encounters. We got to have our intro, we got to have our setup, add some meat to the bones, and then we need to resolve the thing. Yeah. And so as we would work through that, then we got to like an outline stage, and we would chuck them all the ideas in there and sort them out and think about what works. But we wanted it to not be, I knew I didn't want it to be overly complex, and it wasn't his style to make things super complex either, as a young teenager. So it was really about what are kind of the fantastic things that will be neat and will create fun situations, right? So if you come upon the ruined caravan that has been attacked by something, how is that neat and how is that fun? And we would think about that, and he'd be like, well, what if there's something in one of them that could cause it to go on fire?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that's really cool. Here's how we can do that. And here's how we could make it interesting. So maybe it's cool because one of the boars, that's attacking you might be gets caught on fire, or maybe it's one of the characters, and that might be quite the surprise too. And maybe the characters, if they learn about it, they can choose to do something with that knowledge, right? So it's that kind of situation of how do we make this, the concept that we came up with, interesting. And that's something I always do, right? Whatever my encounter visions starts out as, it's an ambush by, whatever, troglodytes.
Yeah.
How do I make that interesting? And just creating those settings, like where is this taking place? What will make it engaging? What will make the players feel clever? What will delight the DM about setting it up, right? Those kinds of situations, and you just keep working on it until you think you've achieved that.
Yeah. I think I always have like my go-to list is always like, okay, step one is like, how can I make the environment itself interesting in some way, rather than just like a flat 20 by 20 grid. What can we do to make things a little bit more dynamic? And then secondly is always the kind of at least the idea of like, okay, well, let's not just make it like players versus these monsters and stuff like that. What are the monsters trying to do? Or like, what is in this? Maybe they are trying to set that pig on fire for whatever reason, which again is horrible. But maybe it's like a demon pig, and that's part of the ritual. Who knows? But then it kind of adds that kind of like staggering effect. And the idea that like anything you kind of put, like the best situations are you put things in for the enemies to use, like, I don't know, like a pit of fire, knowing that it can be used against them and vice versa. It kind of goes both ways.
You want to design cheering on the players, but in a way that the DM is going to delight in, right?
Yeah.
And the DM gets the credit, right? Not the writer. That's fun.
And when in doubt, just pop like one or two chandeliers in, just because I must admit, like, there is a situation where I think, like, I don't know whether it's my tables, my players don't look up that much. Like, I don't know if they're just not used to verticality. They're all very, they're very used to keeping their feet on the ground. But rarely do I get like a player like, "What's on the ceiling right now?" And I'm like, "Well, thank you for asking."
Well, that's where you have to create shadows then.
There's
a shadow that's really interesting. It's the chandelier up above, whatever.
There's a sign in the middle of the room that just says "Look up," and then
look up,
they go.
That'd work perfectly in Acquisitions Incorporated.
It would. But so smooth conversational segue aside. So I guess to kind of pull back then a little bit then and kind of look across kind of, I guess, everything that you've kind of done. Would you say you kind of have like a favorite and least favorite part of like, the creative process, or?
That's a good question. There are two things I for sure really love. There's the point where your ideas come together enough that you feel it. There's a feeling of like, this is what I wanted to create, and I'm excited to be doing that work. Because it's really, I'm sure of it. I have a confidence in where this is going. This is what I want. This will lead me to the outcome that I desire. And that's a great feeling. And so there are all kinds of projects I could think about where there was that moment where I was like, yes, this is going to be fun. And I like that. That's a really neat. I also really love when I'm seeing people play it, right? That reinforcement of like, okay, this was good to create, right? I'm seeing someone jump on the back of a dragon and go to another table, or they're writing about what they loved, or just even like in Acquisitions Incorporated, it's the kind of thing that a lot of people might not even want to try. And so it was fun when one of my friends on Twitter was like, "I'm running a thing at a store. The table next to me is running your book," and they're laughing all the time. And I'm like, yes. That's like one thing I can ask is, have you had like many opportunities to kind of like, I guess, sit in on one of your own adventures? Yeah, I didn't used to, but again, my friend Sean Merwin, who I do the Mastering Dungeons podcast with, he taught me this, and I thought he was really quite nuts the first time I heard it, where he was like, "Yeah, I'll sit down and play through my adventure. I won't say anything. I won't say I'm the author. Yeah. I'll try to pick a table where I don't know the DM, so they don't know that I'm the author, and he'll just play." And I'm like, what? That is the weirdest idea.
Yeah.
But I tried it. The first time I tried it was for a confrontation at Candlekeep, this event we'd written for that first started at Gen Con. And I just had fun playing it and seeing it, what the DM did. And halfway through, this other DM goes in and says, he wrote this, right? And it was a complete change because am I doing it right? I'm like, stop, keep going. You're having fun. Like, it's great.
No, it just fascinates me. It's just because, again, you always kind of have to play like the very, like, I guess, like the characters who always just nod and just agree to whatever the general consensus is. Like, I have no strong opinions about anything. I will do whatever but yeah, no, I can't imagine that kind of that kind of experience. But it's got to be
neat, though, because you do get to see, you get to hear the words the DM uses to describe what you've set up.
Yeah,
and that's informative, because they may mischaracterize it a little bit or not characterize it the way you thought it would be obviously characterized to the table, and that tells you something, right? If it's set up a slightly different way, or if the tactics aren't obvious, like let's say you put in some ramps and chandeliers, and the way the DM describes it doesn't at all highlight that, and you thought it would be, right? And nobody's going to use them, and you're like, I didn't do my job there to make this clear. That's the intent. So I find it very useful from that perspective. And what I generally do is I'll play a character that has a support role and a strong personality in a certain way, so that the players know that I will make certain types of decisions, right?
Okay, yeah.
And it's never going to be like kick the door down, but it's sort of like, I do what Paladin says or something like that, right? I'm playing this half-orc that follows the Paladin. And so I'm always on their camp. And that way I get to have a decision, right?
Yeah.
Or, an impetus, but it's on a certain path and it's an obvious one.
It feels weird just because, like, so from I guess like a slightly scientific background, it's not really, you don't really like insert yourself into the experiments that often. You just kind of, but again, I think it definitely kind of has its own kind of like, in the way that like when you hand your adventure off to like another DM to just get feedback on, being there actually at the table and stuff like that, I think it's, I guess because you're always like cognizant of like, okay, well, maybe the flow isn't quite as clear right there, or what can we I think it's on my to-do list.
You should. It's really good, and especially for a lot of writers that write for organized play that create CCCs or so on. They don't even go to a convention that runs their adventure, and I understand that it's sort of like not wanting to listen to your recordings or whatever. I get the point. But I think it is really important to sometimes peel back that layer and look behind it and see what is happening with what I create, so you can learn from it. Just as it's very important to run lots of people's content, because you'll see the patterns emerge, right, as to how it was written and what effect it has. Like I ran a mystery adventure once that this is in the 3rd edition days. And there was a moment when they were like, I think this is what's going on. And that was true. But then they got sidetracked by 2 other things. And I didn't know how to get them back to their previous conclusion, because they'd said it, it was sort of like discarded, like we've already been there. And so it was both DM tips of me having to learn how this happens, but also in the writing, there was no tool for the DM by which to nudge players in a particular way if they just decided a clue didn't add up. And that was a really important learning lesson for me.
I must admit, I think again, mysteries are definitely their own kind of beast, because it is that balance of like, we want to give enough clues that again it's not trivial for the player, but we found all 3 parts of the smoking gun, it's probably the person who likes shooting guns, or or vice versa, of like, wait a minute, this letter is from the cousin of the 3rd Dukes, and then have to do this whole like lineage thing. I think and they typically, or they do have those kind of moving parts, because again it's there's a lot going on, but they are fun to write. Again, it's kind of a design challenge to kind of sink your teeth into.
And if you play role-playing games like Call of Cthulhu, right, they'll often have these sort of higher mysteries that will get resolved, and seeing how they get resolved even if you're just a player and you're not running it, you'll see how it gets resolved, and you can get a feeling for how it was written, right? That there was this way that the resolution would for sure happen.
Yeah.
Which is what you need to have a satisfying experience.
Yeah.
Right? Some portion of it must make sense. Otherwise you leave going, what was that about?
Yeah.
And so playing enough of those, you kind of go like, okay, these are the different ways I can do that right now. And they become tools in your arsenal.
Yeah. I must admit, there's always the temptation to just feel like a murder mystery where you as the DM, you don't know who the murderer is. And you just let the players kind of stumble in, like they just find like this is a clue, and you're like, sure, why not? It is, yeah. Mm-hmm. But so before we kind of touch on the kind of your least favorite part of the process, you mentioned something about a dragon flying across tables, and I feel like you're talking about like writing kind of like an epic.
Yeah, it was very similar to that. So there was a Confrontation at Candlekeep was a multi-table event, like an epic these days, before there were Adventures League epics, and you had these groups of like 5 or 7 tables that would be doing a thing, and there was a dragon, and one of the first times it was run, this kid at the table says, and the idea was the dragon shows up, attacks a bit, leaves, goes to another table.
Yeah.
And so everybody gets a little taste of fighting the dragon, because a dragon is too much for you to just go toe to toe with. So you get around with it. So that was a lot of fun. And early on, this kid says, can I jump onto the dragon and keep fighting it? And the DM comes to one of us and says, is that and we're like, yeah, give them a check. They may fail horribly and fall to their doom. Give them a check to catch on to something. If they don't go splat, then they are back where they started. And we saw a number of people try to ride the dragon. And then they'd show up at the next table, right? They'd go with the person who was running the dragon, moving from table to table, and the kid went along with them and fought at the next table. And then we put in a rule for a tail slap that would send you flying back to your table.
Nice, because
it would affect the balance of the original table, right? So we had to have, eventually you got to go back home, right? So go back to your table now. But it was fun because they felt very epic. And we had a number of characters that fell to their doom. They tried to hang on, they failed, they didn't catch onto the edge of the parapet, and they just took incredible damage from falling, and that was the end of them. So and
more kind of generally, I guess, what is it like kind of like dealing with, like, again, a multi-table kind of adventure? Just because I imagine, again, it is a case of like, you're not writing one adventure. Well, you are writing one adventure that, again, fundamentally has like 8 or so starting parts.
Yeah, so it depends. And that's another case where, in organized play, I saw a lot of these. Like 3rd edition Living Greyhawk organized play had just tons of these really neat events. And they were designed by regional groups that were physically located in a particular area of the world, not just the US. And so each group had a sort of different style. And they brought new creativity to it. It wasn't all being done through Wizards of the Coast or, this one group of freelancers or anything like that. It was quite different. So you'd see things like, attack a castle, and you choose, where are you going to go? Are you going to go at the gate? Are you going to go at the siege weaponry? Are you going to go at this other thing? Or it might be defend, and it might be the opposite. Like, where do you want to defend? There are dragons coming. Someone needs to keep the catapults protected. Someone's going to attack the sally door, so you got to protect that. So you just come up with all these different scenarios, and people can go to their spot. Sometimes it's choice of missions, right? You can do one of these 4 missions, and everybody must do enough of them so that we have success. There are a lot of different ways that they come up with these mechanics that are all very fascinating. And so you almost have to start with, what do I want this event to feel like? And then ask yourself, how does a table know that there are other tables?
Yeah.
So we had an interactive, for example, that for the Ashes of Athos Dark Sun campaign that I headed up for a while in 4th edition, where we had an epic that took place on the Silt Sea. So this is like an ocean, but it's made of dust. Yeah. And we have these levitating ships that we're on, and then enemies attack. And it was this huge kind of naval battle. Yeah. And so there are things like, you're taking out, table 1 is trying to take out the necromancers. The necromancers are doing a ritual. Until they take them out, horrible things are showing up on other tables, summoned by these necromancers.
So you can definitely feel like there's a weight on rooting for other players' kind of success, because like right now I'm suffering and they need to pull their weight.
And then a good thing happens when you stop the necromancers. Not only do the bad things go away, but something else, boon might happen. Or there was a catapult that would throw balls of bone that then would animate into skeletons. And someone stop that catapult, please. And the way we would do it is we would have an event master that would say things like siege fire, and so every DM knew like, oh yeah, the catapult went off.
Yeah.
So a skeleton shows up, a couple skeletons show up at this table, and everybody's like, oh man, someone please take care of that catapult ship. Right? And the group doing it is like, we're trying.
It just feels like it's such like it's a convention experience. It's something that is kind of it's another thing on my to-do list. I want to go have like a multi-table epic kind of experience.
It's a lot of fun. Well, and these days you can even do them through the virtual weekends.
Yeah.
So you can sign up and play an epic online just through the magic of Zoom and Roll20 and things like that, which is really sweet. And so there have been a number of epics that I've attended or helped run that way that are very cool.
Nice. Well, thank you for taking me down that path and so far. So to go back to an earlier question, the other side of the coin then about like if you have your two favorite parts, what is necessarily like a least favorite part?
The easy answer is the intrusion of my real life. So I wish I had more time, and having 2 kids, having a wife, having a day job. And my day job sometimes is at night because I consult, and I have my main client is in Japan, so it's totally different hours. So there are days that I think like I'm going to write today, and then life throws me a curveball. No, the kids need you. They needed help with the homework, or they have to be taken to a thing, or I'm going to write all weekend. The dog's sick, who knows, right? Like, and so that intrusion is tough because I can't just treat it like a job, like I wish it could be, where I would say, today is writing day, I am writing, tomorrow will be writing day, I'm doing the next piece. I've written adventures on a plane, I've written adventures in cars on the way to a ski trip, you name it, like just everywhere. And from the side of a pool, I had a really good idea about how there could be a water slide in adventure sitting at the edge of a pool.
I don't know what it is, but like sometimes I do find like the places where I focus the most are as like those times where like I'm in a train, or like I have no other excuses other than like, oh, I've got time, so I've got to write. But I can't really manufacture a train journey every day.
I would love to have a plane flight scheduled magically when it's time for writing, because it's like a weird booth that is almost sensory deprivation. And hopefully there's no internet, and so it's like you must do this. You must write these words, and plus when you arrive you're not going to have any time, so you got to do it now. I wrote Acquisitions Incorporated, I think probably 20,000 words worth were done on plane flights from here to Japan, because it was like the rest of the week was a lot of work, so I had to get it done on the plane, and so I would just.
So maybe that's what we should do. We should like get like a writers fund to like fund like airplanes that go eventually. We'll just voice your way around the world like on a round trip and stuff like that, and people can hop on and hop off and just like, be in this writing zone. Maybe
expensive writer's workshop.
It would be. I imagine it probably wouldn't be the cheapest of things. If not, we can do the same thing with a bus. I don't know. No, fair. So
I think another part that's frustrating for me is less about I think in general the process. I'm okay with the process. I think it works well for me, and I don't have any major complaints about it. I'm okay with writer's block and things like that. It's more the overall industry itself, I'd say, is sort of my second thing that I look at, which is that, pay is not where it should be. People don't pay what they could for the amount of enjoyment they get out of things, which translates into companies not paying very well, or many of the companies not paying well. They don't pay a living wage. And so it's really hard to make it all add up and to give it the work that you want. And for talented people to get properly compensated for all of the work that it requires to create these things. And that's probably the hardest thing, because there are a lot of things that I would like to do. Like I would like to publish on the Guild more, but it's really hard to justify it. Losing 50% of my income, yes, you get a platform, but it just means that the time it takes, the number of sales it takes, and if you'd all try to add art or anything like that, it's that part's frustrating. And even when I tried to do things myself, as I've tried to, as I'm working on this Kickstarter, when you realize the price of art and what it takes to run a successful campaign and to get an audience, and it's all hard enough that it makes it harsh to be in this hobby as a designer.
Yeah, no, I 100%. Yeah, it's particularly as well. I mean, like you look at like, unfortunately, with kind of sometimes with like kind of like saturation of like, just so there's so many awesome people kind of out there for content, and sometimes it can always feel like a race to kind of like drive prices down, because it's like, oh no, if I price it too high, I won't get any. So then it's like. But it's and definitely, again, with at least within like ecosystem of the DMs Guild, that I think there's been like a considerable like uptick in terms of like just quality of like publication. Yes. There are some like absolutely astounding kind of products being kind of placed there, and I think again some of the larger kind of collaborations and stuff like that are starting to kind of push that thing of like, no, we're gonna price this fairly to make sure the collaborators kind of get their fair cut. But in no way, shape, or form is it like a one battle or something. It's going to be kind of, I guess, I was about to say ongoing in perpetually, but I hope it doesn't. I want it to end.
I hope it isn't perpetual. But we are seeing improvement, right? I mean that's the whole Paizo union. The discussion that the freelancers for Paizo have had. There have been discussions that freelancers for Wizards of the Coast have had publicly, and all of that I think is helping all companies that are in the space to think about what they are paying and what they're doing. And I've seen in the past products that a company would create, the company really shouldn't be creating it. And the way they validate doing so is by paying very little, so that they sort of can't lose with the approach, even if it's a bad approach. And the way you'd rather it be is pay properly, work carefully so this thing is a success. And explore those vehicles so that this will have drive, especially if you're a company with a reputation. Like you should be paying well and making things that have high sales and high profit. Otherwise, what are you doing?
It's like what 101 of business is just
Why are you paying nothing for things that don't really have many sales? Like let's do that differently.
No, fair. No, again, I can only kind of agree and kind of echo all kind of your statements. But then I guess to kind of bring like a closing kind of like remark to the kind of like your creative process, then is there one thing that you've kind of done that you kind of, I don't know, like reminisce about? I don't know, like, or you in the sense that you kind of point back to and just like, I'm really quite proud of that.
That's hard. I feel very fortunate. I've had good projects, and so as a result, there are a number of things that I feel really good about. I think the design of Acquisitions Incorporated is very good. I'm very proud of that design. I wish more people would see it. I mean, more people see it than see most works, but it's the kind of thing that the audience, a lot of people go like, I don't know if that book's for me. But I think the adventure in it and the rules in it are really quite solid and create good experiences. So I'm pretty proud of that. Vault of the Dracolich was probably the best project I've ever been on in terms of how it felt to create with everybody else. We would have these regular design meetings. Everybody showed up, Mike Shea and Scott Fitzgerald Gray showed up just with great ideas, and they all did their parts, and we interlocked really well. And that was just a wonderful project that I always look back on, and I know they do too. Like we just sort of go like, I don't know what we did, but we just did magic.
Just the stars aligned and everything.
Yeah, it was really good. But yeah, it's great, and I love working with good people. Like Kat Kruger did the editing on Hero Quest, and all the team at MCDM is great. The Dwarven Forge people are super creative, and so it's always great. Each of these projects brings me in touch with different people, and I love collaborating with them. That's a lot of fun.
I guess, kind of like making cool stuff with cool people. No, so actually that you set me up nicely. So then I guess kind of like, again, with all these kind of amazing kind of collaborations and kind of, again, working with, again, all different kind of sections of the tabletop RPG community as a whole, would you say there's like any kind of particular people who kind of stand out as like sources of inspiration?
A lot. I mean, we're so lucky in this hobby. I probably end up going back to Will Doyle and Stacey Allan as a well of inspiration as much as probably anyone these days. I think if you look at Wild Beyond the Witchlight, to me, that is a design that really resonates with me as sort of how I like to do things and how I like to, what kind of things I like to read and run and play.
Yeah.
And so I've always liked their work and been drawn to it. And I love them as people. They're just really super dear people. So yeah, they're probably the main. I would say you can't go wrong consuming all of the things that they've created as a source of inspiration for ideas and approaches. Wild stuff, right? They have this, and it's fun because they have this tenderness that you can see in some of the Wild Beyond the Witchlight scenarios. A real kind of grasp of people and stories and how to tell good, kind, fun stories. But then also this pulpiness. You know, like Will Doyle will be like, what if we have a pyramid that's on rollers and it's going to roll over everything unless you stop it, and it's got this mad king in it and this, that, and the other. Yeah. It's just like the craziest idea that I just go, how did you come up with these ideas? They're so, you know, it's like an Iron Maiden song turned into an adventure, and just it's the best.
Yeah, like a true dynamic duo between the two of them.
Yeah. Their maps. I mean, it's almost in too much. I mean, I like stop with how good you are. That you're also these incredible cartographers. Like, and Stacey does amazing layout.
It is like the complete package. Like you want, you want like an RPG project done. There you go.
Her day job is making video games, right? It's like, she's doing the layout for Clockwork Tower. It's amazing, and so they are so good. So that's a duo that you can't help but be inspired by all the time.
Nice. And then I guess so to kind of I guess I don't know, reminisce is the right word or something like that. But it's like to look over everything you've kind of done. Then would you say that there is kind of like any particular lessons that you kind of wish you'd maybe learned sooner?
I think the lessons that I would stress for others, rather than just myself, would be that idea of trying to be involved in some way that you are seeing lots of games being played. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be going to conventions. Like, for example, I was part of a gaming club when I was I lived in Pennsylvania in the late 90s. And it was this group that every time we would show up, they would run another thing. Yeah. I always I'd bring my character from the previous session. They'd be like, nah, this week we're playing, we're playing Vampire. And next week we're playing this other thing. And then it's Shadowrun. And just all those ideas and all those different ways and different DMs, different players, different characters, different quests, that all of that was really super stimulating. Yeah. So whether it's conventions, finding a group like that, running things with your friends that are just, hey, let's run a different RPG, every month or something like that. Just surround yourself with different ideas and concepts and people, ideally different people too. So you see different ways that things can be done. Watch live play if that's your only option. Not everybody loves that, but it can be a great way to see different RPGs played by different people in different styles. And I find that super helpful for design. It's always been one of my strong suits has been the idea that I come to the design table with lots of ideas because I've seen all these other creators do it, and that's great.
No, I think you're 100% right. That at least from a designerly outlet, you can only really benefit from diversity in terms of games played and everything. And it's like, as you could have to steal some of your own words, it's building up that toolkit, to have I now have a spanner for these kind of situations. Or it probably doesn't work if you take the
right?
Yeah, I don't want to take it too literally, because then I would have to justify what a spanner is in terms of tabletop RPG design, and I'm not emotionally prepared for that.
Will Doyle wrote a couple epics actually that use mechanics from party games. Yeah. So board games too, right? He had these other influences where he saw the ways that people can have these fun interactions, and then he set them up. Like one of them was in a triage tent. Half of the party gets these handouts and have to role play an perhaps injured person, and the other half has to decide, is it a minor injury and you can go back to battle,
Yeah.
Is it major and you need to be cured? Or are you a zombie and you're going to eat people, right? Like
Yeah.
you're going to turn into a zombie. And so that diagnosis matters a fair bit. And it played out as a sort of party game type thing. And I'm playing this and I'm like, this is genius. Like
Yeah.
someone just, someone being Will, sat there with this party game concept and like, how do I make that into a role-playing experience that's really fun? It was almost like a LARP scenario, right? Really good.
Yeah. No, and again, it was always funny that sometimes the most kind of memorable experiences is where you are kind of you're stepping out of the traditional rule set, just because, like, again, sometimes you need to, and then something should be kind of like celebrated, because the rules are there to be used and in some cases expanded upon to kind of suit your needs. No, awesome. Well, okay, so Teos, looking at the time, we've done it. It's an hour. An hour has kind of spun by without us. Well, yeah. I mean, as my duty as a podcast host, I've been paying slight attention to the time, but that's not through a lack of stimulating conversation.
Yeah, that went quickly. That was great.
Yeah. But before kind of leaving, again, you kind of touched on a little bit about the Clockwork Tower, but I guess if you don't mind going over like some of the cool stuff you're currently working on,
Thank
and
you.
kind
Yeah.
of.
So,
I was going to say where people can kind of hear about it. Sorry.
Sure. So the Clockwork Tower will be launched via Kickstarter. It's very close. It's the kind of project where I want to actually, and because I'm so busy, I want to get it done. Yeah. So you'll back it, and when the thing ends, you're going to get it. So I'm working through that and getting it all set up for that. So that should be on Kickstarter. The best way to find out about it or track its progress is to join my mailing list on alphastream.org. Nice. That's also my blog. So when you sign up for the mailing list, you'll get usually once per week an article about D&D and design and DMing. And then you'll also get a free product, the Rules for Collaborative Campaign Creation, as part of signing up for that. So that's another cool thing you did, which was my most recent thing that I published on DriveThru. And other than that, I know it's been said that I worked on a recent Dwarven Forge adventure that will also come out free in the near future that supported their previous Kickstarter. So that will come out. And that was a very fun series of adventures to write. There were other writers as well this time, so it was very cool.
Nice. Well, you can also
find me, I should say, on the Mastering Dungeons podcast. Comes out every Thursday on the Misdirected Mark Network. It's available wherever good podcasts are provided. And on Twitter @AlphaStream.
Nice. And yeah, like I said, as always, there'll be a whole bundle of links down in the description for anyone who's like, oh, what's an easy way for me to find these things? Well, the links are right there. You just have to click them. But no, well, other than that, again, thank you so much. This has been I've been an absolute honor and an absolute blast, honorary blast.
Same.
Yeah. Well, I mean, other than that, yeah, I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes. I don't think I have anything pressing coming out at the moment, but stay tuned. And then Teos, we have my final and honestly my favorite question, which is how do you end a podcast?
Usually by being very thankful of the people who listen.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, it's been a while. I haven't thanked so for the people listening. Thank you for listening. Again, coming up to 2 years of doing this thing. So again, you from a heartfelt thanks for enduring me for so long. And yeah, thank you.